Nic Blair has won many awards for his entrepreneurialism. In 2011, he founded Search Factory, which was later acquired by the world's fifth largest media agency, Dentsu. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Nic had multiple business failures and was rejected 73 times by investors before raising $45 million for his latest venture, Midnight Health. He calls himself a car nerd and is here today to share how he's achieved all of this before the age of 40. Nic Blair, welcome to Trillions Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So you've just had your second successful business acquisition with Midnight Health after raising $40 million. Congrats.
Thank you.
Extra special considering you're a Brisbane entrepreneur. Now, I know that your background isn't in healthcare and you have a business and marketing degree. So did that entrepreneurialism shine through in your childhood years, or is it something you realized more through university? Where does it come from?
Good question. I guess I did find myself with a bit of a entrepreneurial streak, I suppose, as I was growing up. I think the first venture that I can think of is when I was at school and working at Foot Locker. And we used to do these family and friends every quarter where they did huge discounts on sale prices. And so I would go through the back room and scoop up all the shoes that were marked down to like ridiculously low prices where there might be like one pair left for $10 or something, and then started an eBay store. And so I started selling shoes before reselling shoes was cool, I suppose. And so that was kind of my first entrepreneurial venture, I suppose, when I was at school. And then, that actually led me into doing business and marketing degree. So I originally, when I was younger, wanted to be a radiographer for some reason. Maybe I've gone full circle and that's why I've built a healthcare business now. But yeah, I definitely pivoted into business and marketing as I started to sell my own products to people and work in a sports retail store as well.
Yeah, interesting. And did you have any family who were business owners themselves where maybe you got inspiration from, or are you the first of your kind in your family?
No, so my dad owned a furniture removals business for most of his life. So I certainly think my work ethic and other aspects that have helped me to kind of build and grow businesses have come from him. I think a large part of the lessons that he taught me would be to take me to go and move furniture with him on the weekends when I was like 14, 15 years old and tell me that I don't want to do that for the rest of my life like him. So
Thanks,
I think
Dad.
that's actually helped to then send me in another direction and go and put my head down and build the companies that I have.
Yeah, cool. And so why healthcare then? If you don't have a background in healthcare, what's inspired this business?
So what I've personally found is that if you look at what's happening in other markets, Australia is typically 3 to 5 years behind the rest of the world.
True.
And so leading up to kind of the end of the exit for Search Factory, my last business, I did spend quite a few years going to TechCrunch Disrupt in San Francisco, going to numerous startup events over in the US and looking at what was happening in the US market as I was looking to launch my next venture. And there was a couple of things I was considering, but over 2018, 2019, just pre-COVID, businesses like Roe and Hims and Hers, which were direct-to-consumer digital health companies in the US, were starting to gain a lot of traction, get investor funding. And so from my perspective, the model of digital healthcare and virtual healthcare delivery was certainly going to make its way to Australia, even though it hadn't had the adoption that it has now throughout COVID and after COVID. So for me, it was really more taking inspiration about what business models and innovative models are gaining a lot of growth over in international markets and how I can bring in and launch that here in Australia.
Yeah, cool. And so what was the first step? So for me, someone who's never raised capital like you have, never had a startup in that regard with staff, what was the first step to the business?
So one thing that I found after having multiple ventures, I've probably had more failures than I have successes, right? We only need one or two to work to make it all worth the time and effort that it takes. But I've certainly developed more of a playbook over time. And so I feel like that sets me up for more success with each venture as I take all the learnings from the last one and move them into the next one. So the first step was really validating the commercial business model, what the market trends look like, what do we think is going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. I think there's a lot of businesses that have a lot of success following, short-term trends, gimmicks or, novelties that might boom. And some people make
fidget spinners.
Yeah, some people make a ridiculous amount of money selling fidget spinners, but, that's not like a long-term business that, has a long-term opportunity and not solving a real problem. And so for me, it's understanding the market dynamics, understanding, the maturity of the market here in Australia. And then a big part for me is like actually understanding the opportunities for customer acquisition. Like, is there already demand and people looking for this product? And so, for example, the first products that we launched with women's healthcare were around Australia's first morning after pill delivery service, contraceptive pill, thrush treatments. We could already see that there was like a lot of search volume online for those.
So you found that online through online research?
Yeah, so Google Ads, a fantastic tool to determine whether there's like already demand for a product. So if you use Google Ads, you can see keyword planning tool. You can see how many people per month are searching for specific problems or products or services. That gives you a really good idea of whether there's a market demand that already exists. And then the next step is really just trying to build out the commercial model. And that's where we had to start going and having conversations with people, understanding really, how much money we could probably make per consult or per medication delivery, and sort of work backwards from there to actually make sure there was a viable business in it.
So were you actually going to doctors, going to pharmacists and having face-to-face conversations?
Yeah. So, and that's like probably a lesson too that I've learned over the years, that you'll always find people who are willing to give you some time of day. Not everyone will, but if you have a big enough list of people to go and outreach to, there'll at least be some people on there who will have a conversation with you, give you some advice. So my business partner, Matt, actually took on the pharmacies, and that was interesting in itself because some people would just ignore him, not answer him. Some people would say to him, no, you can't deliver the emergency contraception online. I have to consult with people face to face. So even through the conversations with pharmacists, there were some who were very positive about what we were trying to do to improve access to these medications in a time that might be challenging for people who need them. But then there were other pharmacists who were like entirely against the idea. So we kind of just spoke to quite a lot of pharmacists and to A, validate that we think there's an opportunity, and then B, start to work through commercial models with them as well.
How do you know whose voices to listen to?
For me, it's a combination of pulling all of the information that you have together. So you might sit down and talk to 10 pharmacists and get 5 different answers from each side, some that are positive, some that are negative. But then if you combine that research and data with the demand in the market from the consumers themselves, the problem that you're solving, you then look at the trends in market for the shift to digital services, whether it's healthcare or otherwise. All of those things combined help you actually make your own informed decision. So I don't necessarily think it's a matter of listening to one individual person, but how do you actually gather all of the information that you have to make your own decision?
Okay, interesting. And you mentioned before a bunch of failures. So let's touch on some of those real quick. I can relate for sure from past businesses that I've tried and haven't gone as well as I thought. You could call them failures. So what is one big failure that you look back on that stands out for you?
So one that I was only talking about it this week, so it's like fresh in my mind, but one thing that really didn't work out for me, and this was actually slightly later, and this is while I had Search Factory slightly later in my career. I was reaching out to a freestyle motocross magazine called Freerider to look at doing some advertising in it for another venture. And through that conversation, I was told that they were shutting the magazine down. And this is obviously in the decline of print magazines. And so it turns out later that they were selling it off because they were actually about to do an exit themselves. And so they were just kind of chopping off, any of the smaller publications and just selling the main magazines that they had. But in my head, I thought, oh, look, yeah, it's a declining industry, but this is a cool business and I like this space. Grew up riding motorbikes, reading Freerider. So I was like, oh, I'll try and buy it off them. And so they said, oh, we'll sell the whole thing to you for like 15 grand, which was cheap to acquire like a whole magazine. I was like, okay, cool. And then I committed to like doing 2 print runs and publishing. And then was basically taking money from kind of Search Factory, putting it into that venture to try and just keep it alive. I was like, I could just run this on absolute skeleton staff, me and one other guy who was working like part-time, and basically just kept sinking like money month after month into this business. Did 2 print runs. I think lost about 30-40 grand on each print run, which was more than it cost me to buy the business. And so then I just got to the point where some other guy paid even less to buy it off me, who was like another guy the same as me who wanted to save Freerider. But the lesson in that for me is that, like, don't turn a hobby into a business unless there's actually like a commercially viable business in there that makes sense. So for me, I thought, it doesn't need to make much money, but actually it turns out it couldn't make much money, and I couldn't even get it to break even and just cover itself, even though I didn't even want to take any money out of it. So you really need to get back to the fundamentals of a business and go, is this a growth area firstly, not a declining industry like print magazines? And is there actually a commercially viable product there? And turns out there wasn't, and I spent a lot of time and effort and money trying to prove to myself that there was.
Yeah, well, that's a great lesson. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I know before Search Factory, you were working for a marketing company. Is that correct?
No, I was actually working for Flight Centre. So I basically spent 2008, 2009 as my first attempt at launching some ventures. So probably, started 5 or 6 things over those 2 years. Eventually got to the point that I ran out of money. The bank was trying to get money back on a loan that I was behind, too proud to ask my parents for money. So then I had to go and get a job. And then I worked at Flight Centre running their digital marketing for about 15 months, I think, and then decided to do it again and then jumped out and started Search Factory.
So after 15 months, just 15 months of working, you saved up some money. Was that like a cash buffer to pay the bills whilst you launched Search Factory?
Yeah, it helped me. Well, it helped. I gained a lot of additional knowledge and experience there. Like the one good thing from that period that I spent there, it was actually pretty short in hindsight, but it gave me access to enough budgets, and managing a bigger budget for a bigger brand helped me to actually learn a few more things, test different bits and pieces that would then help me go and build strategies when I launched the agency, learn how big businesses like that with big budgets work as well. I'd only ever been in kind of working in the smaller end of town prior to that. So that sort of 12 to 15 months there actually really helped me to understand a lot and see an opportunity for when I launched Search Factory. So the opportunity really was that at that point in time back in 2011, most of the digital agencies were really targeting small businesses. So it was like, let's target Jim's Mowing for $500 a month and lock them into a 12 or 24 month contract. And that was almost like the model of agencies. And so people who wanted to spend big budgets actually had limited agency partners to go to that were actually targeting like the medium to larger end of town.
Interesting.
And so that ended up becoming what I went after. And then inevitably that's what happened as Search Factory was acquired by a big kind of global media group, because the media groups who weren't playing in digital, as more and more of that budget started to go into digital campaigns, they obviously started to invest in and standing up digital agencies themselves.
So what year did Dentsu acquire that business?
So it was acquired in 2016 on an earnout that ended at the end of 2019.
And how did you know that was the right time for you to exit?
So I think like business entrepreneurship, like timing is almost critical, right? And so the thing that we noticed over kind of, let's say the 12 to 18 months prior to that, is that when we used to go into a pitch, we'd be pitching against other boutique, specialist digital agencies, search agencies and the like. And then we started going into pitches against the likes of Mediacom, OMD, Dentsu, who are these big global like powerhouse media agencies that have like 3,000 staff in Australia, build these pitch decks that are like, or RFP responses that are like 100 pages long, and they've got dedicated teams working on it, and then presenting something that's just far beyond what we would deliver to a client, as a pitch, as a smaller sort of boutique agency. And so we could see that trend happening already. So at the point in time when they approached me to talk about, what a potential partnership or acquisition looks like, it already felt like there was two paths to go down in the market, which is either become a part of the big agency groups and leverage their brands and their capabilities to actually scale up and grow further, or try and fight them head on. And looking back, there was a few agencies in Brisbane in particular that were around the same size as us at that point in time that ultimately didn't get acquired by anyone. And then, kind of watch their staff numbers go from 30 to 40 down to 5 to 10 over time as the bigger agencies came in and picked up all these budgets. So
what was your staff numbers when you did sell?
We're about 37, I think, when we were acquired. Yeah. And then we kind of grew every year of that period up till 2019, which was good.
Cool.
Just before, timing couldn't have worked out better because COVID then hit like 3 months later.
Yeah.
And all the revenue dived, but it didn't impact our net.
Yeah, spectacular.
Yeah.
Spectacular timing. It's always good when you look back and you can see a great timing and it all makes sense.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to 20-year-old Nic?
Not spending enough time doing preliminary research on business or startup ideas. So as I said, the thing that I've found has helped me to probably have more success now is actually looking at the fundamentals of a business. What does the financial forecast potentially look like? Is there actually a commercially viable business in it? If I look back at some of the things that I launched, I would literally like have an idea, wouldn't have even thought about how I would actually make money off it. And then like 2 days later, I'd be sitting there trying to like build a website or something like that for an idea, because I'm like decided I'm either solving a problem or people will think this is cool or like it. And then I burn all this time and energy, money, launching something that actually I don't even know what the margins are going to be or how I'm actually going to make money or what I like need to actually deliver to, say, get a scale, for example, if you're selling advertising, to actually get a reasonable return. So I think I just like dived into things, which again, in hindsight, I think I learned a lot by doing that, but it's also why all those early ventures, none of them worked.
Makes sense. A lot of what you did with those earlier business ventures was you made a decision, you committed to it, you launched into it wholeheartedly, and that's where you learned yes or no is viable, and then you moved on to the next thing. So there's pros and cons, I guess, to your earlier experiences. So it sounds like your skills in marketing really helped with obviously the successful acquisition of Search Factory. So how did that help your transition into Midnight Health and getting that off the ground?
Yeah, I think there's many aspects of a business, regardless of what it is, what industry it's in, who you're targeting, that are very similar. So when it comes to the financials and understanding that's commercially viable, B, actually doing customer acquisition and understanding how to leverage the digital media channels that are available to actually acquire customers, hiring staff and building out and running the operations of a business. So there's many aspects of those that are the same. If you think about what Midnight Health was as a direct-to-consumer digital health business, look, we're fundamentally promoting or helping drive awareness and access to a consumer-led digital product experience.
Let's just touch on that for a minute. So give us a quick synopsis of what Midnight Health does and what the brands you have underneath that specialize in.
Yeah, so we've essentially got two brands really that we focus on now. So there's ALYSE, which is women's healthcare. So we get, again, as I said, we launched with Australia's first emergency contraception delivery service, access to contraceptive pill, thrush treatments. And then we launched another brand called Hub.Health, which is kind of becoming the bigger of the brands, which is essentially the same platform, providing the same services, but from a branding perspective, it's targeting kind of gender agnostic, age agnostic, kind of family healthcare. And so over time, we've built to a point now we're kind of focused on 24 different condition-based programs, including things like weight loss, sexual health, skincare, and the like. We provide telehealth consultations, prescriptions, and then deliver medications to people's door as well. So we also do things like medical certificates and other products and services like that. So we've serviced over 230,000 patients since launch, done over 450,000 telehealth consultations.
A lot of those are rural too, so there's a real need for this healthcare outside of the inner city centre where there's lots of medical centres to go to.
Look, the thesis of the business is improving access to care, and particularly in regional or remote areas, that's where the biggest challenge exists. So we've delivered to, we service basically 99% of postcodes in Australia. We've delivered to like Kangaroo Island. We've delivered to a postcode that we've deemed as being the most remote in Australia, in Western Australia.
Wow.
We've found an image on Google Images of the location that's basically like a small community in a big patch of red dirt.
Wow.
There's probably like 20 houses there, and we've delivered medication there. So there's definitely some really cool things about improving accessibility and then actually seeing that come to life as well.
There's other health platforms out there, so how come you guys stand out?
At the end of the day, I think it's being good at customer acquisition is like a skill that has been developed over a long period of time. I think you get a lot of founders who build great businesses, but they don't know how to do sales and marketing. And so their platform or their business or their innovation or technology in any industry ends up sitting on the shelf, or they don't know how to go and pitch it to people, or they don't know how to build a story that helps you go and raise capital. And they're all the bits and pieces that I think some people don't have the experience in, which is detrimental to their success.
Yeah.
And so from our perspective, I think just having a good handle on how to actually acquire customers for a digital product or service was extremely valuable when it came in. When we started the business, basically my first goal after we got everything live, was to raise capital off and find an investor. And so I had a very clear view of what I wanted our growth story to look like when I would go in and pitch to an investor. And so ultimately we were able to scale and spend our customer acquisition budget effectively to be able to generate and show that story to investors, which I think is much more tangible and valuable than going into an investor meeting and just saying, I have an idea, but there's no traction or nothing.
Too risky for the investor most of the time. When you started Midnight Health, did you start with capital from Search Factory? And how did you know how much of your own money to use before you went to investors?
It's a good question. I mean, we kind of worked backwards, right? So, I mean, we started with the initial scope of, okay, well, what are the resources we need in terms of people? What is the other outlay we need in terms of building the technology platform and other bits and pieces? So there's kind of a starting pool of capital that we needed.
So you can't code yourself, so you needed coders.
We needed a developer. We needed to work with a development agency to help us build the first kind of MVP of the product. So we need to do that. We need to spend money on legal because we're in healthcare, and it has a lot more challenges than selling t-shirts. And so we kind of had this starting pool of quotes and investment that we know we needed to make. So that started. And then the real variable on top of that was around people resource and how hard we wanted to go with hiring people. And then the second one was around marketing investment. And so you can use that Google Ads keyword planner, for example, to start working backwards from how much you think you need to spend to acquire a meaningful number of customers.
Yeah.
So we did that. We launched with a PR campaign, which was really successful. And
that was focused on Yuli and the women's
Yeah.
health. You said the morning after pill, which has a technical name, was basically the shining star that helped.
Yeah, so what we did
Yuli
was
boom.
we launched basically Australia's first emergency contraception delivery service on International Women's Day. And so then we worked with a PR firm to kind of turn that into a story and hit that with publications. And so that gave the business like a real kickstart to then drive, good growth sort of from month one, because that was picked up kind of in news and Girlfriend and the Urban List and everywhere, which was great. So that gave the business like an awesome head start. And then we just had to like jump on the back of that with, social advertising and search advertising and invest to grow the business.
Well played. That was a good play, that one.
But what I'll say too, in terms of like how much, your question was how much capital do you think you need? How do you work out how much capital do you need to put in the business? We ended up putting in more than we were hoping to, because we kind of had a runway that we'd set up. We had a time period that we wanted to like raise capital from an investor by. But as always goes with raising capital, it took a bit longer than what we had expected. So we probably had to keep tipping money in for about 3 to 4 months longer than we'd initially hoped to.
What did you guys spend on the MVP?
Oh, the tech build was maybe like around 100 grand, something like that. All up, we probably invested about 750 to get up to the point of getting an investor on board.
And you have your business partner, Matt.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to have a business partner, and how did you choose Matt? How did you know he was the right choice?
So Matt actually worked for my last business. And so he was basically like the operations manager / GM of that business by the time I kind of exited Search Factory. So it was very good to build a working relationship that we had over like a 7 to 8 year period. A lot of business partnerships fail, but I think if you've worked together and even through an acquisition, my business where he played a critical role in that, we established a really good working relationship that ultimately just lifted and shifted into the new venture. So that was really good. So having had a few different businesses, and I have had a few different business partners along the way, what I would say is that I definitely think it's easier, depending on what you're trying to achieve, it's easier to go on that journey with a business partner and someone that you can work together with. There's some venture capital firms around the world that don't invest in businesses that have single founders for that reason.
Interesting.
And the other thing is finding somebody who has complementary skill set. So that's why Matt and I always had complementary skill sets when we worked together in my last business. And so you could lift and shift and then divide and conquer. I think the other challenge sometimes for founders is they have a partner who's like a replica of them. And then you end up spending all your time and energy kind of wasted just doing the same things as each other or butting heads on differing opinions. You need to be able to give each other autonomy and space to take ownership of various things, because then you can achieve more and scale faster.
Good advice. Do you have any mentors outside of your business partner, Matt? Any mentors at all?
I wouldn't say I have any like mentors that I speak to on a regular occasion, but I definitely have a network of people that I speak to every now and then about various bits and pieces. Other founders, our accountants, other specialists, people who are experienced in different areas that I don't have a structured mentor relationship with, but I can say, hey, let's go grab a coffee and chat about business. And if there's things that are good to get off my chest or things that I want someone's opinion on, then they're the people that I turn to. And I find a lot of founders very happy to give up their time for other founders. And I think that's a great thing in the Brisbane environment in particular, and something that I think other founders should lean on as well.
I'm aware you had 73 no's from investors. You said it took you a long time to get them on board.
Yeah.
How did you find the investors? And you mentioned also a smart story. What was the smart story you were pitching to them?
So the big thing for me was showing that we'd already launched a product and that we had traction. And so one of the ways that we were able to do that was because at the end of the day, every investor wants to see a graph that goes like that, right? And then you go, cool, we just dip some more money in and it just keeps going that way, which it has to most extent. But you want to prove that. And so one of the things that we did, and the other thing too, is you don't want to, some people make the mistake of going, we've got, 200 grand we want to spend on marketing, and they front load it. And so what happens is if you front load your spend, A, you spend a large chunk of it inefficiently, but B, if you start running out of money, then you're actually going to be walking into an investor meeting with a graph that's going down as opposed to a graph that's going up. So we took our pool of funds that we had and started incrementally increasing that on a monthly basis. So that allows us to, you should do that anyway, because it allows you to test strategies and see what works before you blow all your money. But the other thing that creates is a graph that looks like that once you get your marketing dialed in. So as we scaled up each month, then it meant that, our customer acquisition was going up, our revenue was going up. Obviously, our repeat customers were going up as well, which is important. And so that kind of helped us to craft this story of growth, which was, more powerful than going into those investor meetings and saying, we've got an idea or we've built a platform. So with that being said, though, that trying to raise capital is the hardest thing I've ever done in business.
Why do you say that?
It's pretty brutal. And if you speak to any founders who've most founders who've kind of hit the pavement and tried to raise capital will say the same thing. Like, you have to be prepared to have hundreds of conversations. You have to be prepared to go into meetings where people don't understand your business model as simple as you might think it is. There are some investors who are pretty brutal in terms of their feedback as well. So you have to be willing to kind of go in and sit down, take all that on board. You get asked questions right at the start that you don't have an answer for. That's always a challenge. And as a founder, you try to spin a story to give an answer that makes sense. But that's like, it's a really challenging path, but it also helps you to learn a lot about your business. When I look back at the feedback that some of the investors gave us who didn't invest in the business, they had really good thoughts, opinions, advice that they shared at the start that ended up shaping what the final version of the pitch looked like, or the way that we thought about the business in the long term.
What were some of those questions that were pretty brutal that you maybe didn't have an answer for at the time?
Well, one of the hardest questions to answer, and so I do some mentoring at Health Startup Accelerator down the coast and through a few other programs. The question that I got asked very early on that was really hard to answer was around defensibility. And so if you're trying to get an investor to put money into a technology product or any other kind of business, they want to understand whether it's defensible to competitors coming in. And the example that I'll give you is that some of the investors said to me, at that point in time, I think we were trying to raise $2.5 million on our seed round. We ended up closing 4 via NIB. But the question they were asking is, if Woolworths came into this space tomorrow, or Wesfarmers came into this space tomorrow, and they decided that they wanted to put $100 or $200 million into the digital health sector, which is likely in healthcare, and they would ask me that question. They go, well, how is your product defensible to compete with that? And now a defensible business might be something that has some proprietary technology or IP or a patent or something like that. If you're an innovator or somebody who's designed a product, that's like very defensible, right? People can't come after that. If you're in a space like ours, there's not that many barriers to entry to bring a digital health business to life. So then it becomes marketing, scale, customer acquisition, capital investment. And you can see all the other players in our space have raised like a lot of money to continue to build and compete. And then a couple of years later, Wesfarmers bought Instant Scripts, NIB's invested in us. Woolworths has just invested in another one. So actually, what these investors said would happen has happened. And so really
how were you guys defensible, or how are you defensible now?
There's a company called EVP. Dan from EVP. I'll always remember Dan. I enjoyed the conversations with him. He probably doesn't even remember me. But he was the one who I had really good conversations with about this. And so that helped me to think, who's the right investor for us? And so not all investors are equal, right? And so taking, the amount of money from $4 million from one investor is not the same as $4 million from another. So it comes down to who are the people who can support the journey in the long term, who are good strategic partners that either have complementary businesses or the like. And so that really, all the conversations I had early in our capital raising journey started to suggest to us that we need to find a good investor that has capital that could follow on in future rounds, support ongoing growth, make strategic sense for them.
Yeah.
They could drive customers to us. And so all of those things led us down a path of trying to find someone that wasn't just a early stage investor who didn't have any more capital, didn't have any customers, couldn't provide any additional value. And then one day got an email out of the blue from NIB who had heard about us, and that kind of kicked off the conversation. And from the first 2 meetings that we had, it was like evident that they were the right fit from a strategic perspective. And all the earlier conversations, though, helped us get to the point where we realized that very early on.
You said that NIB reached out to you guys. How did they find you?
So they were doing their own survey of the market. And so they actually had an interest in digital health. The other insurers in Australian market do, and have launched telehealth services themselves, either through investment or partnerships. So it was at a stage where the health insurers were all actually looking into this vertical and trying to see how they could play a role, bring these services to their members. And so they were doing a scan of the market. We'd obviously kind of launched about 6 months earlier. They had an advisor who was working with them as well, who was doing a bit of a scan of the market. And I guess through our own promotion and then some of the media and pitching that we've been doing, looking for capital, kind of ended up with us landing on the
so they probably Googled
chief
you
executive's desk
at some point.
and then I got an email out of the blue that was just like, hey, this is Ed from NIB, and he's the CEO now. And he said, hey, interested in hearing more about what you guys are doing. And so it was a pretty, short, vague email, but obviously in my head, I was hoping that that's what the point of the conversation was about. And it was, so it was great.
What should someone say to an investor if they don't know the answer to a question?
A lot of startup founders stumble over this, because I've been in the seat of either investing. Some founders will reach out and want to pitch me their ideas, or when I do the coaching in the health accelerators, some founders try to bullshit an answer, and it's very easy to tell that they don't have the right answer.
Yeah.
And the reality is most investors know you won't have all of the answers. You're better to say that you will go to either research the information that you need, get the data that you need, come back to them on that. It's similar to how you would do any sales pitch, right? Like most sales pitches, you should also take the same approach where you might say, your potential client might ask you a question. You say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll speak to the team. I'll come back to you, make a note of that, leave that meeting with 4 or 5 questions, go away, come back with strong responses. And that's what I would do in those meetings. And there's probably maybe a skill or lesson I picked up from doing sales in my previous business, trying to get clients. And so I think you need to treat investors like a sales pitch. There are some questions that you should know the answer to, like if you don't know your numbers very well, you don't know the commercials for your product, how it's going to work, how you're going to sell it. There's things like that show that you've got a level of immaturity in terms of understanding your business and how you're actually going to grow it or deploy the capital that you get. But there's definitely questions that they'll ask. They don't expect you to know everything. It's more that you respond in a manner that suggests that you'll go away and find a better response and come back, and then you just need to blow them away the second time.
What was some really brutal feedback you got from an investor, and how did you not take that personally?
Oh, look, I mean, I'll start with the second part. I don't think you can take anything personally, right? Like in business, everybody has an opinion, right? And everybody, no matter how much experience they've got, whether they've got no experience in starting a business, whether they've got, all the experience in the world, everyone will have an opinion. And I think as a founder, your job is to gather up all of those opinions and then, make your own decisions based on the knowledge that you have at hand. So I don't think you should, live and die by people's opinions, but you should take them on board, because sometimes they do help to make you question certain things that maybe you have a confirmation bias towards. So I do think that that's helpful, and it helps to challenge your own thinking, and you can use that to build a better business. I don't know if I would say it's brutal feedback, but one of the investor meetings I went into, I sat down, and within the first few minutes, one of the guys at the table started arguing with me about why people would pay money to have medications delivered when they could go down to the pharmacy and get them themselves. Now, there's so many things about this business that I thought, would warrant questions and challenges from investors that people didn't understand. That was not the thing that I thought that people wouldn't understand. I was like, at this point in time, Uber Eats was well used. People do online shopping. They get their groceries delivered.
I lived in China, and you could order anything you wanted to your door. Yeah. A brand new laptop, a hairbrush, anything.
Yeah, and we got stuck on this point for probably like 15 minutes. Luckily, there were a few other guys at the table, and they kind of moved. They were like, they said, one of the guys actually specifically called out, look, the business model has already been proven, so we need to move on from that part. And I think that he disagreed with the other guy at the table. But I spent a solid 15 minutes with this guy kind of aggressively arguing with me that nobody would want to pay to get something delivered. And I was like, look around, because there's definitely many of the businesses that have already proven that that's a model that works and that people are willing to pay for. And this is kind of the point about finding the right investor. Within the first 3 minutes, I could have said, let's end the convo, because clearly you're not, you don't understand the business model. You don't believe in it. You wouldn't be a good investor or partner if I somehow managed to convince you to get across the line. You need to find those investors who are the right fit and who understand what you're trying to do. If they don't, then it's an uphill battle, and it's going to be very hard to work.
You mentioned before it's important to have an investor's belief when you take money from an investor. Do you believe in manifestation? What are your beliefs around building the life of your dreams? There'll be a lot of people watching this podcast who aren't where you are yet. You've had two successful acquisitions.
Maybe not manifestation, but I've got a tattoo on my shoulder that I got years ago that says motivation reflects reality. And so ultimately, I think what you're motivated to achieve, you will get there. And so I think that a lot of what separates probably the success of one founder or business owner from another is their persistence and motivation to actually achieve the outcomes that they're trying to get to. Because the reality is that path is never straight. And that's, it's pretty common knowledge and, well documented that the path from here to here is often like this and not like that. And so what it really comes down to, from my perspective, most of the time is who are the people that are committed and willing enough to just weather the storm and keep working through the challenges that it takes to start a business. And I think the other component of that is that entrepreneurship should be a longer term journey. I think some founders get stuck on one business, started and failed and it didn't work. If you listen to the stories of most founders who have had some level of success, they've actually had a bunch of failures along the way. Often people only find out about them when they've had the overnight success, but actually they've got a whole trail of things that they've tried to start or dabbled in or launched that haven't worked along the way. And that's how they've learned and built up a tolerance or lessons. So at the end of the day, I think what you set out to achieve, and it's like, if I use example of raising capital, that was way harder than I thought it was going to be. I had an exit from my last business. I had a network that I could start the conversations with. And you see every day, this business raised a couple of mil, this business raised a couple of mil, that when you look from the outside, you think looks like a pretty basic concept. So for me, I actually thought raising that first round was going to be, pretty easy. And it wasn't. I had to have so many conversations. But if I look at that experience, I literally would have just kept going until I got the money. And so you shouldn't set a timeline for what success looks like as well. It'll come, kind of when it's ready, or at the point where all of the pieces of the puzzle come together. You meet the right investor, or you hit the right timing with your idea. So at the end of the day, I just think that persistence and motivation is the key. And then the second component that I'll add to that is that I think you should think as big as possible, because I think if you set out and say, hey, I'm going to build a $1 billion business, and you don't succeed in doing that, you might build a $200 million business or $100 million business, and then you turn around and go, oh, great, that was still a good outcome, right? I think if you set out to try and make $1 million and you fail, you might make $0, or you might make negative $500,000. And so I think you make conscious decisions to try and build a big business. And even if you land 50% or 30% or 20% of that, you might still have driven yourself a good outcome. So I think setting your sights as large as possible help to actually have you land in a good position.
They say aim for the stars and then you'll land in the clouds.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. You have a beautiful wife and young daughter now, and you guys have known each other since 2013 or earlier?
2007.
Okay, wow. Yeah. High school sweethearts?
No, we actually met on a cruise, a P&O cruise.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think I was 20 and Petey was 18.
Yeah.
This year she's, it was our 18th anniversary, and that was officially half her life.
How do you balance business with a relationship and a family life? It seems, through social media at least, you're quite balanced and you have a nice flow. Has it always been that way?
You need to have established a good rhythm with each other and how you do life together. Petey had been through numerous ventures of mine that had not succeeded. And so she's been there, right from the start. Understood the challenges that come with those, understood the amount of work that needs to get put into, launching and growing Search Factory, or doing the same again with Midnight Health. So I think the first thing is that you and your partner need to understand kind of what each other needs to be able to, achieve success as a combined unit, I suppose, as a couple. And so she's very supportive of me. She understands what it takes to grow and build a business and how she can kind of help support me and do that. And so I think that's the first thing that's really important. But I think you grow together to establish that kind of relationship. I don't think that happens from day one.
Does it require conversation or spreadsheets? What are some practical tips you can share with anyone who's got a partnership plus a business? Maybe they feel like they have to choose between the two. Or...
Yeah, well, I think it's open communication, right? I think, so we've kind of established a rhythm where I will say to her, if all right, I'm about to have a big week, something's going on, I might be stressed out, or something I might have to stay longer at work or whatever. And so when I set those expectations where I can, in advance. And so I think that's helpful. So then in her mind, she's like, okay, well, I'll try not to bother you too much this week. I'll know that, we'll wait till the weekend if I've got something that, might be trivial that we need to talk about or something. So I think it's having communication with each other. Again, when you run a business, there's always spanners in the works that you don't foresee. So I think it's also having a partner who's supportive and understands that is the case, and that's the what it takes to be a founder and run a business. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, they need to have an understanding and a view that what you're doing helps benefit your life together. I do know of other friends who are founders who have been in relationships where they do have a partner that's not supportive of them having to put in the extra work to build a business or achieve that. And that is a challenge, right? And I think that's a dynamic that's never going to work. If you're getting married to or dating a founder, you have to understand what you're getting yourself into, because I think they're a very specific type of person.
Yeah.
And then the other comment that I'll make is that throwing a our daughter's 3 years old now. And I basically started Midnight Health pretty much, when Petey got pregnant and we had her. So I've been like very much in the thick of trying to learn how to like be a parent and run a like very fast growing startup at the same time. And we got it worked out as a couple, and then you throw another dynamic in, and then that like certainly created more challenges to try and go, how do I have enough time of day to dedicate to growing this business, being a husband, being a dad. I think we've got a good rhythm now, but that was certainly, I did the first couple of years that was a real challenge.
Did you feel guilty?
One thing that was really hard for me was, especially when she was slightly younger and she'd go to bed a bit earlier, is like there'd often be a few days in a row where I would like leave early, go to work before she wakes up, get home after she's gone to sleep. And that still happens sometimes now if she's tired and goes to bed earlier. But there will be sometimes it's like 2 or 3 days when I don't even see her. And they're like the hardest times because you feel like you should be there. And no, it's hard for my wife to be, at home getting terrorized by a small baby all day. So you want to come and get home and give her a little break as well. So it is hard. But again, I think it all comes back to communication, like, us communicating with each other and, her to tell me if she's having a hard time or a hard day. And so I can make sure that I, try and get home earlier or something like that. Like you just need to communicate with each other. And
sounds like you're ultimately a pretty good team.
Yeah, we are for sure.
Yeah, awesome. So 2 successful acquisitions. What did you spend the money on?
My view from, over the course of what the Midnight Health acquisition might look like, my current goal is to invest most of that back into other investments or business ideas. But when I sold Search Factory, that's where I was like, I need to get some rewards back for all these years of lost money and hours put in. So
hard work. Some cheeky rewards.
Yeah, that's right. So, and I think it's important to do that. Lots of different people have different views on this. Some founders I know don't spend any money and they don't buy anything, but I get a lot of enjoyment out of the things that I spend money on. So when I got the first payment for Search Factory, the upfront one, I bought my GTR, and then, which I still have now, like 8 years later. And then when we got the final payment, I bought my Lamborghini that I've got. So
STO.
Yeah, the STO. And so, well, actually, I bought the first Huracan, and then then I traded that up for the STO recently. But yeah, they were kind of like my big things that I bought for myself, and that's because I probably I don't even care about what house I live in. Like, really, the only thing that I feel like that I really enjoy spending money on is cars and travel.
So did you invest any of the money? Did you keep a portion of that for yourself, plus buy some toys, plus invest into other business, or are you all in?
I read an article for someone years ago, and the way that they spent money, it was like in a car magazine. So it was about people who love cars just like me. And he was basically saying, he takes maybe 20% of his like net worth he would put into buying cars and toys and things that he liked. And then distribute the other percentage kind of his net worth or income into other investments or other things that were ultimately, either not going to lose money or not just hobbies or toys. And so I think I always like to apply a bit of I don't live by any kind of specific metric for how I do this, but I think it's important to only spend money that you can afford to spend and not max yourself out on anything like that. And so that's why it's important for me that I only buy these things if I hit a milestone where, there's the capital to afford it. I certainly know people who try to do the opposite and stretch themselves as much as possible. And I think that you're making a huge mistake doing that, because then you're actually missing the other opportunities that would come your way. So for me, it was like, buy Lambo, we bought a new house, put a bunch of money into Midnight Health, and, look at other opportunities as well. And so then, I think it's good to always have a balance and distribute, your capital into, probably more into things that are going to generate more of a return and less into things that are either going to cost you money or, are just fun to have.
Did you notice after the first sale that you had a sense of relief, that there was a weight off your shoulders in terms of life? I've heard from other founders that when they get that first acquisition and a chunk of millions in the bank, they feel like they can kind of chill out a little bit. Did you get that?
There's 2 components to that. I think the first one is like financial freedom, like without a doubt, and just like freedom in general too, for how you can spend your time and not have to worry about money is a weight off your shoulders. So that component for sure, I think, helps you live a life where you don't have to stress or worry about the things that you had to previously. And I think that's a really nice feeling and a really nice position to be in. And that's why I think it's also important not to continue to overstretch yourself, because some people could make millions and millions of dollars and then all they do is just upgrade all of their living expenses. And so then they're still stressed about money.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how much they actually just got paid, because now they've just made it now they just like increase the maximum amount that they need to make or the minimum amount they need to make every year so they can actually live with their new, ultra expensive lifestyle. So I think that's a mistake that people make. But for me personally, I love the journey of trying to come up with an idea, solve a problem, see if I can actually do it. Like that's almost the thing that I'm addicted to, right? So I love the 0 to 1 in a business journey. Some people are better suited to taking over once a business is more established. There's a lot of good seasoned CEOs who are the perfect person to come in once you've got 100 staff and you've got established processes, policies, product market fit, a business that exists. I'm very much the 0 to 1 founder, and that's what I love. That's what I thrive in. And so I find myself always looking at ideas. And before I'd even, finished the Search Factory earn-out, I was already working on Midnight Health and already spent a couple of years looking at different opportunities and testing different markets. So for me, there wasn't really it's a sigh of relief. Now I can like take some time off. I was almost like, what am I going to do next before I finish this one?
So you like the thrill of the chase a little bit?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
And so, for me, it's the journey is the fun part, right? And so it's like trying to prove to yourself that you can do it over and over again. Like there were certain things, personal challenges I almost set for myself with launching Midnight Health, which was the type of business that I wanted to start. Going through a journey of Search Factory, I didn't want to launch another agency or a similar type of business. I wanted to do something entirely different. It was more tech focused. I wanted to raise capital because I'd never done that before. There are a whole bunch of things that I almost set out as personal goals that were part of the next journey or the chase that I wanted to go on.
What's one of those personal goals that you haven't achieved yet?
Scale something more globally, like next time around. And so there was a kind of a bit of a view on that with Midnight Health, but ultimately as we build a business out that's become kind of a provider of healthcare services, it does become a lot more challenge to lift and shift that into another market. So if I look, 5 years down the track, what type of business would I like to have founded? For me, it'd be more software only, or even if it's not software only, it's something that's way more globally scalable, that's easier to kind of launch into new markets and grow a bit of a global footprint and build even bigger than kind of what Midnight Health was. So I think I've set like a new goal and a new target and from the learnings of this business and the last business, I've now got a slightly adjusted formula for what I want the next one to look like.
Interesting. When are you starting that? Have you already been working on that?
Not yet. We've got to finish the Midnight Health journey over the coming years, but then we'll hopefully be pretty ready to start working on something straight after.
Very cool. And you enjoying challenges? Is that why you enjoy Brazilian Jiu Jitsu?
That's something that I've been doing for probably like 15 years now.
Did someone introduce you or stumble into it?
Yeah, one of my friends that I went to school with, we were both talking about doing it together. This was 15 years ago. So it wasn't very big back then, but we were both kind of interested in it. We started watching like a little bit of early UFC and the like. And I really didn't like going to the gym just to like lift the weights and do cardio. I just find that the most boring thing in the world. So part of it was thinking, I want to, be good to go and learn jiu-jitsu. We're actually interested in it. And then good way to do exercise is something that I actually enjoy. And to your point, that's like a never ending cycle of learning.
So what belt are you now?
Black belt.
And what's the next belt after that?
Well, there is one more belt, but you get it after you've been doing it for like 50 years, which is like a coral belt, which is like a red belt.
Okay.
But there's like only really a handful of people around the world that have that. So it's a long time before there's kind of anywhere further to go. But that's one of the things I liked about jiu-jitsu. So it takes an average of around 10 years for most people to get a black belt. So it is something that you need to stick at for a long time. And you really only get belts at points where you really deserve them. And so I think that appealed to me as well, because it is something that you really need to commit to. The percentage of people that start that actually make it to black belt is like a very small percentage, as you can imagine, given the length of the journey to get there. So it's something that I've do a few days a week still 15 years later, and I love it.
Is that your outlet? If
I'm not training, then I do find that I find it harder to sleep at night. I do find that it's like kind of my outlet, in a weird way, doing like a high impact kind of sport is like relaxing.
Yeah.
Same way I like to drive cars out on the racetrack or ride a motocross bike. It's like all those things that like force you to focus on the thing that you're doing at that point in time is what I find kind of relaxation in, that takes you away from thinking about work or life or other bits and pieces. And so I've always tried to make sure that I find time to fit that into my life. And so I used to do night sessions, and then when I finished Search Factory, I was doing lunchtime classes, had a bit more extra time. Then as Midnight Health's got busier now, and we've got a child, I now do the 5:45 a.m. sessions in the morning. And so I get up at 4:30 most days of the week, go and train, and I do that before I go into the office. And it's a good way to start the day.
Cool. Very cool. I really want to get into BJJ because that's really good personal development. No, not personal development. Self-defense.
Yeah.
And women don't know how to get out of a tackle from someone who's heavier than them. So I'd really like to learn that.
Oh, and it's good for that, because the problem is if you go learn like on a kickboxing or boxing or something like that, like the only way that you can defend yourself is like by standing there and having to fight someone
with one
leg.
Like,
yeah, it's like hard to do with like someone who's bigger than you or whatever. Jiu-jitsu is awesome for actually like controlling a situation, learning how to like control a situation, control somebody. So yeah, you should definitely do it.
What's a misconception about entrepreneurship that you would like to debunk?
Something that we touched on earlier is that most entrepreneurs who have had success have had either the equal or more failures before they got there. If you're not close to entrepreneurship, startups, founders, you probably do look at it from the outside, and all you do is read articles about all these people who have started, these successful businesses, or this person's had an exit or grown this business or that business. I think the thing that people don't realize is that most people have been through a far tougher journey than what it's actually taken to launch that one thing that's worked. And so I think that's something that most people, and rightfully so, most founders aren't out talking about the fact that they don't go out and like get an article that talks about, hey, so-and-so just launched this business and it failed. Like no one A wants to write about that, and B, they probably don't want to talk about it. They probably want to put it into the back of their memories and pretend it never happened. So I think that's like the most important thing that, for most people to understand.
Do you think most entrepreneurs have a certain personality type?
So entrepreneurs are risk takers, right? Like I think ultimately the one trait that you would probably find is that most entrepreneurs probably lean more towards the side of being willing to take risk to start a business. Like a lot of people who spend their lives trying to be really risk averse, avoid losing money, or people who are who don't want to take risks in their personal life or in their business life. Like they're a certain type of person that's probably not that well suited to entrepreneurship or being a founder. Like you need to be willing to put things on the line to actually get the benefit of that, and do it time and time again after you've just lost a bunch of money on the last one that didn't work. A lot of founders do fit that type of personality where they're kind of like high risk, probably have ADHD, probably willing to like just grind it out and work and do what they need to like get the outcome, because that's what they're focused on, not the they're not worried about are they going to get the level of pay that they want the first when they start the business on day one, because the answer is no. And some people have these business ideas that I meet and that I talk to, and they're like, well, but I currently make $150,000 a year at my job. What am I going to do when I go and start this business? I need to make $150,000. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen, because you need to grow the business to pay you that. And so some people just have a misconception or just don't have the right mindset to be able to like jump into the trenches and then just see if you can grow your way out.
And how do you decide what to pay yourself in the beginning days?
Oh, that is a challenge. And it depends on the business that you've got as well. So if I think about Search Factory, that was kind of profitable from, pretty early on. Bootstrapped that business.
Were you the sole owner?
I was, until I brought another business partner in, but started initially just myself growing that business. When you're in a business like that, that's like more service-based, you generate profit straight away. You do have a decision about whether you invest more into yourself or more into the business to keep it growing. Now, I was always focused on what's kind of the minimum that I need, and leave the rest of the money in the business and keep investing into hiring more staff, getting an office, growing the business. And that's how I always approached it. So I think at that time, as it was scaling up, I was maybe paying myself 80 grand a year or something when I could, and then leaving everything else back in the business for as long as possible. And it depends on your goals. Some people have a goal where they're trying to extract as much value as they can out of a business so that they can go and put it into something else. And then if that's your personal goal for the business, then you should do that. But if you're actually trying to build a business, you need to be committed to not pulling all the cash out of it. You need to be continuing to reinvest so that you can continue to grow and be focused on the long-term goal. When I started Midnight Health, didn't take anything for, and it comes down to financial position. And obviously just exited, didn't take anything until we got our first round of capital. Then I still paid myself a pretty low wage up until we got the next round of capital. So I think you should really grow that incrementally with the success of the business, where it makes sense that you should take some more out of it. But I think if you're focused on pulling as much value and capital out of a business as you can, then you're setting yourself up for failure or stunting your growth as well.
Yeah. Oh, good advice. Good advice. Thanks for sharing the figures too. One thing I like to do with my guests is ask them to ask me a question. So flip the interview for one question. So hit me with your best shot.
What are you trying to build right now, and how big are you trying to build it?
So my main focus right now is the podcast, Trillions.
Yeah.
And my goal with Trillions is to build it to a point where I can get a sponsorship deal from Spotify or a platform that wants me exclusively to their platform.
Yeah.
Along the way, I'll also look into sponsorship deals, and that'll be my next step, to take on some sponsorship deals. But the biggest thing is the podcast, to make it top 10 in the world, and make it specific to entrepreneurship and founders who have built from zero to something.
All right, and I'll ask you a second question. Do you know how many listeners, readers, monthly listeners that you need to get to be able to achieve the goals that you're trying to set out to with sponsorship deals and size of revenue that you're looking to aim for?
Not yet.
Well, should be your next task.
That's a great question. Thank you.
So you should understand, what is the number of listeners that I need to get to that would help me to secure deals with the certain types of advertisers that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And so I assume that you would be able to find enough information online that would help you to work backwards to say, okay, these are the size of listeners or engaged users that enabled these different podcasts to be able to secure these types of deals. And so if you do enough research in that, you should be able to plot a roadmap that will allow you to get to that point.
Yeah,
and then you can work backwards from, how do I market the podcast to acquire that many users?
Yeah. Is that what you did to get investment dollars? Did you kind of have a rough idea of revenue would equal this amount from an investor?
Yeah. So if you look at startup valuations, for example, in the early stages when you're not making money, it's typically a multiple of revenue. Now, the market's changed a lot through 2020 through to now, where people were, 2021 was like the absolute wild west of like startups getting crazy valuations. So that multiple, changed in that period. But the reality is, at early stage business is typically valued on a multiple of revenue, and balancing that with the potential in the space itself. But that's typically how it works. So yeah, you can aim for a revenue that you think will get them, if you say an industry benchmark is 3 times revenue or 5 times revenue, for example, then you can kind of start working backwards from what revenue number do I need to actually get the valuation that I need. So you should do the same.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Nic, and thanks for sharing all your insights, interesting stories about your journey. And I wish you all the best with the rest of Midnight Health. I'm sure it's going to absolutely take off.
Yeah, thank you. And I felt honored to be your first guest in 3 years, and welcome. Good luck with the new podcast launch, and hopefully successful.